The wedding photographer asked if we wanted to stick with the same package as last time. But this was supposed to be my fiancé's first marriage. I never thought I'd be that person, the one who discovers a life-altering secret just weeks before their wedding. But here I am, sitting in an empty apartment surrounded by half-packed boxes, trying to make sense of how my entire future collapsed during what should have been a routine vendor meeting. 6 weeks ago, my fiancé James and I were sitting in our wedding photographer's studio, finalizing details for our upcoming ceremony. We'd chosen Elaine based on her stunning portfolio and warm personality, though she was relatively new to our city, having relocated from Chicago about 3 years ago. James had actually found her through a colleague's recommendation. "We're so excited to work with you," I told her as we settled into the plush chairs across from her desk. "Your style is exactly what we've been looking for." Elaine smiled, clicking through our engagement photos on her monitor. "It's been a pleasure getting to know you both. Now let's talk about the wedding day package." What happened next plays on repeat in my mind, a moment that cleaved my life into before and after. "So, James," Elaine said casually, eyes on her computer screen, "did you want to stick with the same package as last time? The 8-hour coverage worked beautifully for you and Melissa." The room went completely still. I felt my body temperature drop as if someone had opened a freezer door directly into my face. James went rigid beside me, his sudden tension palpable even before I turned to look at him. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Last time?" Elaine glanced up, her expression shifting from professional warmth to confusion as she registered the tension. She looked between us, realization dawning in her eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought—" she stammered, suddenly flustered. "I photographed a James Sullivan wedding in Chicago about 4 years ago. I just assumed— the resemblance is uncanny, but clearly I'm mistaken." She laughed nervously. "Let's look at our standard packages for first-time clients." But it was too late. The damage was done. Because James Sullivan isn't a particularly common name, and my fiancé had indeed lived in Chicago 4 years ago. And his face told me everything I needed to know even before he spoke. "Emily," he said quietly, his hand reaching for mine. I pulled away instinctively. "Is she talking about you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. James closed his eyes briefly, an unconscious admission. "We should discuss this privately." My body seemed to operate on autopilot as I gathered my purse and jacket. I remember apologizing to Elaine, apologizing as if I had done something wrong, and walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight that felt mockingly cheerful against the darkness spreading through my chest. In the car, James attempted explanation, words tumbling out in a desperate stream. Yes, he had been married before. Yes, to someone named Melissa. Yes, the same photographer had captured their wedding. No, he hadn't told me because it had been brief, a mistake, over quickly and legally erased from his life. "It meant nothing," he insisted as we pulled into our apartment complex. "It was barely a real marriage, less than a year, no assets together, no children. Just a stupid mistake I made when I was young and impulsive. I didn't tell you because it doesn't matter to our life together." But it did matter. It mattered that my fiancé, the man I had lived with for 2 years and planned to marry in 6 weeks, had hidden an entire marriage from me. It mattered that he had looked me in the eyes countless times and lied by omission. It mattered that he had allowed me to believe I was his first and only wife-to-be, making decisions and plans based on incomplete information about the man I thought I knew completely. Most of all, it mattered because it made me question everything else about our relationship. What begins with a hidden marriage ends where? What other irrelevant parts of his life had he decided I didn't need to know about? As we entered our apartment, the space that had felt like home just hours earlier now seemed filled with potential deceptions. James continued his defense, growing increasingly frustrated by my silence. "Emily, please say something. It was 4 years ago before I even knew you existed. I'm the same person you fell in love with. This changes nothing." Finally, I found my voice. "It changes everything, James. Not because you were married before, but because you chose not to tell me. We've been together 3 years. We've talked about everything. Our childhoods, our exes, our hopes and fears. We've planned an entire future together. And never once did you think to mention, by the way, I've been married before? I was trying to protect you, he insisted. I didn't want you to see me differently. That wasn't your choice to make, I replied, the shock giving way to a cold anger that seemed to clarify my thoughts. You decided what truth I was allowed to have. That's not protection. That's control. I asked him to leave for the night, to give me space to process this revelation. He resisted at first, then reluctantly agreed, packing an overnight bag while continuing to minimize the significance of both his previous marriage and his decision to hide it from me. As the door closed behind him, I stood in the sudden silence of our apartment, surrounded by wedding planning materials, save the dates already mailed to 150 guests, the detailed spreadsheet of vendors who expected final payments in the coming weeks. The life I had been confidently building now felt like a house of cards, collapsing from a single unexpected gust of truth. I sank onto the couch, my mind racing with questions. Who was Melissa? What had really happened in their marriage? And most importantly, what else didn't I know about the man I had agreed to spend my life with? To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, you need to know what James and I had built together, or what I thought we had built. We met 3 years ago at a friend's birthday party. I remember noticing him immediately, not because he was the most handsome man in the room, though he was certainly attractive, but because of how intently he listened to people. In a crowded bar where most conversations involved people waiting for their turn to speak, James seemed genuinely absorbed in whatever was being said to him, responding thoughtfully rather than performatively. When we were eventually introduced, that focused attention turned to me, and I felt the rare experience of being truly seen. We talked for hours, discovering shared interests in architecture, my profession, historical documentaries, his passion, and backpacking, a hobby for both of us. By the end of the evening, I had his number and a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years of lackluster dating. Our relationship developed with what felt like rare intentionality. Unlike previous relationships that had progressed through passive momentum, James and I discussed each step, checking in regularly about what was working and what needed adjustment. When we moved in together after a year, we had already addressed potential challenges: his night owl tendencies versus my early bird schedule, my need for creative clutter versus his preference for minimalism, how we would handle finances, chores, and social obligations. I believed this thoughtful approach reflected mutual commitment to building something lasting. We had discussed previous relationships openly, or so I thought, sharing stories of college sweethearts, post-graduation dating disasters, and the lessons learned from each experience. James had told me about 3 significant girlfriends, including one named Rebecca he had lived with briefly during his time in Chicago. Never once had he mentioned a wife. When he proposed on our 2nd anniversary, I accepted without hesitation. The diamond ring had belonged to his grandmother, another detail that now felt suspect in light of recent revelations. Had Melissa worn it too? We began planning a wedding that would reflect our shared values, meaningful rather than extravagant, intimate, despite the somewhat large guest list necessitated by our extended families. Throughout this time, we had navigated typical relationship challenges with what I perceived as exceptional communication. When my career advancement required longer hours, James adjusted without complaint, taking on more household responsibilities to maintain balance. When his mother's health scare demanded extended visits to his hometown, I rearranged my schedule to support him through the crisis. We argued occasionally, but resolved conflicts through discussion rather than avoidance or power struggles. We had even addressed potentially divisive topics that many couples avoid: having children, we both wanted 2, starting a few years after marriage; religious differences, he was raised Catholic but non-practicing, I was casually Protestant; political perspectives, both moderate with specific differences we could discuss respectfully; and long-term goals, city life for career establishment, eventual transition to suburb when starting a family. Most importantly, we had explicitly discussed our expectations around honesty. Early in our relationship, after a friend's partnership had imploded due to discovered deception, we had talked about the importance of transparency even when uncomfortable. I can handle difficult truths, I had told James. What I can't handle is being kept in the dark about things that affect me. I feel exactly the same way, he had replied. Relationships need honesty to survive. Otherwise, you're just playing roles with each other rather than building something real. The memory of that conversation now felt like a cruel joke. While declaring his commitment to honesty, he had been actively hiding an entire marriage, a deception maintained through daily choices to withhold information over our 3 years together. Beyond the specific omission of his previous marriage lay the broader concern about his character. This wasn't a single lie of convenience or momentary lapse in judgment. This was sustained deception requiring constant vigilance, removing evidence, constructing alternate explanations for parts of his history, actively redirecting conversations that might lead to revelation. Had there been signs I missed? Looking back with newly suspicious eyes, I could identify moments that might have been clues. His occasional vagueness about certain periods in Chicago, his reluctance to maintain friendships from that time, his careful curation of social media history. But these were gossamer threads, barely perceptible within the otherwise solid fabric of our relationship. Nothing that would reasonably trigger suspicion without prior cause for doubt. The morning after Elaine's inadvertent revelation, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, but concentration on architectural details seemed impossible, while my personal foundation was crumbling. Instead, I began what felt like necessary due diligence on the man I had agreed to marry. I started with basic internet searches, something I had done casually when we first met, but hadn't revisited with any rigor. James Sullivan Chicago wedding yielded nothing immediate. Not surprising, given privacy settings and the passing of 4 years. Social media searches proved similarly unproductive. James had always maintained a minimal online presence, citing privacy concerns related to his work in corporate security consulting. Then I remembered his box of documents in our storage closet: tax records, old lease agreements, university transcripts. I had never examined these papers closely, respecting the boundary between shared space and personal records. Now, that respect felt naive. The manila folder labeled Personal Documents Chicago contained what I was looking for. Divorce papers dated 3 years ago, dissolving the marriage of James Christopher Sullivan and Melissa Ann Winters. The timeline was jarring. Their divorce had been finalized just 3 months before we met. Not the distant past he had implied, but the immediate prelude to our relationship. The legal document provided basic information but little emotional context. The divorce cited irreconcilable differences, that meaningless catch-all that could represent anything from fundamental value conflicts to infidelity to simple falling out of love. It confirmed they had no children and limited shared assets, supporting James's claim of a brief, uncomplicated union. But it contradicted his portrayal of timing. They had been married for 2 years, not the less than a year he had claimed. I photographed the documents, then returned everything exactly as I had found it. The evidence confirmed his previous marriage, but raised more questions than it answered. Who was Melissa really? What had actually happened between them? And most importantly, why had James gone to such lengths to erase this chapter from the history he shared with me? As morning stretched into afternoon, I tried to imagine various scenarios that might explain his deception in understandable, potentially forgivable terms. Perhaps the marriage had been traumatic in ways too painful to discuss. Perhaps he feared I would see him differently if I knew he had already failed at marriage once. Perhaps he had simply made a poor decision early in our relationship that became increasingly difficult to correct as time passed. But none of these explanations addressed the fundamental breach of trust. Whatever his reasons, he had systematically withheld significant information while creating the illusion of complete transparency. He had allowed me to make life-altering decisions without full knowledge of the man I was choosing. Most disturbingly, he had watched me plan our wedding, supposedly his second, my first, without ever acknowledging the experience he had already been through, letting me believe we were discovering each milestone together. By evening, when James texted asking if he could come home, I had reached a decision. I needed more information before determining whether our relationship could survive this revelation. Not just his version of events, which would inevitably be colored by self-protection, but objective perspective from someone who had witnessed their marriage firsthand. I needed to find Melissa. Finding someone in the digital age should be simple, but Melissa Winters proved surprisingly elusive. Social media searches revealed multiple women with the same name, none matching the limited information I had. The divorce papers listed a Chicago address from 3 years ago, but no phone number or email. I considered asking James directly, but dismissed the idea. His responses would be shaped by awareness of my intentions, potentially warning Melissa before I could reach her. My best lead came from the least expected source, Instagram. Though I had already checked James's carefully curated account, I hadn't considered the photographer. Elaine's professional page featured portfolio highlights, including weddings from her Chicago period. After scrolling through dozens of posts, I found it, a tasteful black and white image of a couple's silhouette against Chicago's skyline, captioned only with J+M, downtown Chicago. The photo revealed little about Melissa's appearance, but confirmed Elaine had indeed photographed their wedding. I navigated to Elaine's business website, searching archived blog posts until I found a featured wedding from 4 years ago. James and Melissa's Art Institute celebration. The post had been stripped of most identifying images, likely at James's request, but included venue details and vendor credits. Among these was a makeup artist's business name, Cassandra Lou Artistry. This indirect connection provided my breakthrough. Cassandra's professional Instagram included a post from 4 years ago tagging both the venue and Melissa Winters' dollar design. The account was private, but identified Melissa as an interior designer in Chicago. From there, professional networking sites yielded her full profile. Melissa Winters, principal designer at Atelier Interiors, Chicago. The firm's website featured staff biographies, including Melissa's professional headshot, a woman about my age with auburn hair and a confident smile. Now I had a face to accompany the name, along with confirmation she still lived in Chicago. Obtaining her contact information required more creativity. I created a professional email account using my credentials as an architect, crafting a message expressing interest in design collaboration for a fabricated project. The firm's general inquiry system responded with assigned contacts for different project types, including Melissa's direct email for residential consultations. With her email address secured, I faced the most challenging decision: how to approach her. Direct mention of James might trigger immediate deletion or forwarding to him. Too much personal disclosure could seem unhinged. Too little context would likely be ignored as spam. After multiple drafts, I settled on a delicate balance of honesty and restraint. Subject: unusual personal inquiry, James Sullivan. Dear Melissa, you don't know me, but my name is Emily Taylor. This is admittedly an unusual approach, but I'm hoping you might be willing to speak with me about James Sullivan. I recently discovered James was previously married to you, something he had never disclosed despite our 3-year relationship and upcoming wedding. I'm trying to make informed decisions about my future and believe your perspective might provide valuable context. I understand this request may seem intrusive, and you have every right to decline. If you're willing to communicate, I would greatly appreciate a brief conversation at your convenience. Respectfully, Emily. I sent the email late Tuesday evening, then spent a restless night oscillating between hope for response and fear of what I might learn. By morning, I had convinced myself the message would go unanswered. Why would a successful professional engage with the current fiancé of her ex-husband? But at 10:17 a.m., my phone chimed with a notification that would further reshape my understanding of the man I thought I knew. Emily, I've debated responding, but believe I would have wanted the same courtesy in your position. I'm available to speak by phone this evening after 8 p.m. CST if that works for you. Some things shouldn't be committed to writing. Melissa. The hours until our scheduled call stretched interminably. I moved through my workday in a fog, responses and decisions automatic, while my mind constructed countless scenarios of what Melissa might reveal. James texted twice, increasingly concerned about my continued distance. I provided non-committal responses, unwilling to engage meaningfully before gaining additional perspective. At precisely 8:00 p.m., my phone rang with an unknown Chicago number. I answered with heart pounding, suddenly uncertain about the wisdom of pursuing this conversation. "Hello, Emily. This is Melissa Winters." Her voice was lower than I'd imagined, with a directness that matched her professional biography. After awkward introductions, she addressed the purpose of our conversation without pretense. "I'm sorry you're in this position," she began. "To confirm what you've discovered, yes, James and I were married for just over 2 years. Our divorce was finalized 3 years ago. What specific questions do you have?" The bluntness was jarring, but appreciated. "I'm trying to understand why he would hide your entire marriage from me," I explained. "Was there something particularly traumatic about your relationship that would explain this level of secrecy?" Melissa's laugh held no humor. "The only trauma was discovering who James truly was, beneath the carefully constructed persona. Our marriage ended because I discovered he had been systematically unfaithful throughout our relationship, including during our engagement and immediately after our wedding." The revelation hit like physical impact, momentarily stealing my breath. "He cheated on you?" "Multiple times with multiple women," she confirmed. "Though he would probably use different terminology, he's remarkably skilled at reframing his behavior through selective disclosure and strategic omission." As our conversation continued, Melissa revealed patterns disturbingly similar to my experience with James. The intense early connection, the apparent commitment to communication and transparency, the feeling of having found someone uniquely attuned to her needs and perspectives. Their relationship had progressed quickly, engagement after 14 months, marriage following a 9-month planning period remarkably similar to our own timeline. "The issues began emerging shortly after the wedding," she explained. "Small inconsistencies in his accounts of where he'd been or who he'd been with. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger serious concern, just moments that created subtle dissonance between what he claimed and what seemed plausible." The discovery had come through similarly accidental means. A co-worker mentioning seeing James with a woman at a restaurant when he was supposedly at a work conference in Milwaukee. Initial confrontation had yielded partial admission, followed by elaborate justification. Only persistent investigation had revealed the full scope of deception, not isolated incidents of weakness, but a pattern of deliberate duplicity maintained throughout their relationship. "The most disturbing aspect wasn't the infidelity itself," Melissa noted, but his response when confronted with evidence. He displayed remarkable ability to compartmentalize, justifying each deception as insignificant while maintaining his self-concept as a fundamentally honest person. He seemed genuinely bewildered by my sense of betrayal, as if the disparity between his presented self and actual behavior was invisible to him. As she spoke, I recognized the same rhetorical patterns James had employed when discussing his hidden marriage, minimizing significance, reframing deception as protection, expressing confusion at the magnitude of my reaction. The parallels were undeniable and deeply disturbing. "I'm telling you this not to be vindictive," Melissa clarified, "but because I wish someone had shown me the complete picture before I married him. The James you know is likely genuine in many ways, his interests, his conversational style, his day-to-day personality. What's missing is integrity between his compartmentalized selves. The version presented to romantic partners exists alongside versions capable of sustained deception without apparent internal conflict." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, Melissa patiently addressing my questions with matter-of-fact responses, neither softened by sympathy nor sharpened by resentment. She described their relationship arc, the devastating discovery process, the divorce negotiations during which James had displayed both charm and subtle manipulation with mediators and attorneys. Most significantly, she revealed a pattern that extended beyond their marriage. Through post-divorce therapy and conversations with mutual acquaintances, she had identified similar behavior in his previous relationships, constructed personae tailored to each partner's desires, compartmentalized infidelities, strategic management of information to maintain control of each relationship's narrative. "I'm not suggesting people can't change," she emphasized toward the conclusion of our call. But meaningful transformation requires honest recognition of patterns and committed work to address underlying issues. Has James demonstrated that level of self-awareness and deliberate growth? The question lingered as we ended the conversation, Melissa offering continued availability should I have additional questions, while respectfully acknowledging that my decisions remained entirely my own. Her final words resonated with uncomfortable clarity. Trust your instincts, Emily. The dissonance you're feeling isn't irrational anxiety. It's recognition of patterns your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. After the call ended, I sat motionless for nearly an hour, absorbing implications that extended far beyond a hidden previous marriage. The James I loved, thoughtful, communicative, apparently transparent, existed alongside a version capable of sustained deception not just toward me, but as a consistent pattern throughout his adult relationships. The evidence wasn't merely Melissa's testimony, compelling though it was. It was the pattern now visible in my own experience, the hidden marriage discovered only through accident, the immediate minimization and reframing of deception as protection, the apparent confusion at my sense of betrayal, as if systematic information control were completely normal within intimate relationship. As midnight approached, James texted again. Emily, please, we need to talk about this. I know you're hurt, but shutting me out isn't the solution. I love you. This doesn't change anything about us. But it had changed everything, not because he had been previously married, but because the revelation illuminated patterns I could now recognize in our own relationship. Small inconsistencies in his travel accounts, carefully compartmentalized friendships, strategic information management disguised as normal privacy boundaries, the same subtle mechanisms Melissa had described, previously invisible to me but now glaringly apparent. The most disturbing recognition wasn't what I had discovered, but what remained hidden. If James had concealed an entire marriage, something relatively easy to discover through public records, what else might exist beneath the carefully constructed persona I had fallen in love with? Confronting this question required more than emotional reaction. It demanded methodical assessment of available evidence, careful consideration of patterns across multiple relationships, and honest evaluation of potential futures based on demonstrated behavior rather than promised change. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and began systematic documentation, creating timeline of our relationship alongside newly discovered information, identifying patterns consistent with Melissa's description, noting specific instances of information control I had previously interpreted as normal privacy boundaries. Most importantly, I examined my own resistance to these uncomfortable recognitions. The cognitive dissonance between the James I loved and the patterns now emerging created powerful temptation toward minimization or rationalization. Acknowledging the full implications meant confronting not just his deception but my own vulnerability to it, the ways my desire for partnership had potentially compromised my critical assessment. By evening, I had reached difficult but necessary clarity. Regardless of James's capacity for genuine feeling, his demonstrated pattern of compartmentalization and information control made authentic partnership impossible. A relationship built on selective disclosure wasn't merely incomplete, it was fundamentally compromised at its foundation. When James texted that he was coming home regardless of my preference, insisting we needed to discuss the situation directly, I made my decision. This conversation wouldn't occur on his terms, within the private space where he could employ the same interpersonal skills that had maintained his deceptions. It would happen in a public location of my choosing, with clear boundaries established in advance. I responded simply, I'll meet you tomorrow at Riverside Cafe at 10 a.m., 1 hour, public conversation only. His immediate pushback, we need privacy for this discussion, let me come home, only confirmed the wisdom of maintaining controlled circumstances for our interaction. I held firm on public meeting, prepared for the confrontation that would determine whether any portion of our relationship could survive this fundamental breach of trust. I arrived at Riverside Cafe 20 minutes early, selecting a table with strategic advantages, public visibility that would discourage extreme emotional displays, sufficient distance from other patrons to allow honest conversation, and clear path to exit if necessary. I ordered coffee I wouldn't drink, and organized my notes and evidence with methodical precision that belied my internal turmoil. James arrived precisely at 10 Sawarezain, his appearance reflecting calculated balance between contrition and confidence, casual but carefully groomed, expression serious but approachable. The presentation would have seemed natural before. Now it registered as deliberate performance. "Emily," he began as he sat across from me, "thank you for meeting. I know you're upset, and you have every right to be. I should have told you about Melissa. It was a mistake to keep that from you." The immediate acknowledgement might have seemed like honest accountability before my conversation with Melissa. Now, it read as tactical admission of the undeniable, while preserving ambiguity about broader patterns. "A mistake," I repeated, maintaining neutral tone despite churning emotions. "Is that how you would characterize systematic deception maintained daily for 3 years?" His expression shifted subtly. Surprise at direct confrontation rather than opportunity for extended explanation. "That's not fair. I didn't actively lie to you. I just didn't volunteer information about a brief, failed relationship that happened before we met." "You were married for over 2 years, I corrected, referencing the divorce documents. "That's not brief by any standard definition, and you had multiple opportunities to disclose this information naturally during our relationship, when we discussed previous partners, when we talked about views on marriage, when we began planning our own wedding. Each of those moments represented active choice to withhold relevant information." James's response followed the pattern Melissa had described: initial defensiveness, pivot to minimization, then reframing deception as protection. I was trying to leave painful history behind and focus on our future together. Melissa and I were a mistake from the beginning. Wrong for each other, married too quickly, divorced amicably when we realized our incompatibility. It has no bearing on what we've built together. The practiced ease of this narrative was chilling, delivered with apparent sincerity, despite significant omissions and distortions. I placed the first document on the table between us, printout of divorce filing citing his infidelity as contributing factor. "This legal document contradicts your characterization," I noted calmly. "Your divorce wasn't based on mutual recognition of incompatibility. It resulted from your systematic infidelity throughout your relationship with Melissa." The momentary widening of his eyes confirmed what I had suspected. He hadn't anticipated this level of specific information. The expression vanished quickly, replaced by measured response combining partial admission with continued minimization. That's Melissa's perspective, which understandably colors her recollection. Our relationship was already failing when I made poor decisions I'm not proud of. That entire chapter of my life represents lessons learned before I met you. Nothing similar has ever occurred in our relationship. "Hasn't it?" I asked, placing second document between us. Timeline of our relationship highlighting patterns of information control, unexplained absences, and inconsistent accounts of various situations. "The patterns are remarkably consistent, James. Not necessarily infidelity, I have no concrete evidence of that, but the same mechanisms of compartmentalization and selective disclosure. Different content, identical structure." His expression tightened momentarily before smoothing into concerned sincerity. "You're creating connections that don't exist. Yes, I made a serious mistake in not telling you about my marriage to Melissa. But you're extrapolating from one error to imagine broader patterns that simply aren't there." "I spoke with Melissa," I stated directly, observing his immediate physical response. Subtle tensing of shoulders, micro-expression of alarm quickly suppressed. "You contacted my ex-wife?" Disbelief colored with indignation. "That's completely inappropriate, Emily. Whatever she told you is inevitably biased by her own resentments and distorted perspective." "Her account aligns precisely with documented evidence," I countered. "More importantly, it illuminates patterns I can now recognize in our own relationship. The strategic management of information, the compartmentalization of different aspects of your life, the careful curation of narrative. These aren't speculative accusations, they're observable behaviors across multiple relationships." As our conversation continued, James cycled through increasingly predictable response patterns, attempting to discredit Melissa's testimony, minimizing significance of hidden marriage, reframing deception as protection, expressing confusion at the magnitude of my reaction. When these approaches failed to gain traction, he shifted to emotional appeal. I love you, Emily. Whatever mistakes I've made, my feelings for you are real. We have a life together, a future planned. Are you really willing to throw all of that away because of something that happened before we even met? The question crystallized the fundamental disconnection in our perspectives. From his viewpoint, the hidden marriage represented singular past event with limited relevance to our relationship. From mine, it revealed patterns of compartmentalization and information control that compromised the very foundation of intimate partnership. This isn't about your previous marriage, James. It's about your demonstrated capacity for sustained deception within intimate relationships. It's about the fundamental breach of trust created by daily decisions to withhold information that would have affected my choices. Most importantly, it's about the patterns now visible across your relationships, patterns you either cannot recognize or choose not to address. So that's it? Frustration edged his voice for the first time. One mistake and you're willing to end everything we've built together? That doesn't sound like the understanding, compassionate woman I fell in love with. The attempted manipulation was transparent, invoking my self-image as understanding partner to circumvent legitimate boundaries. I maintained steady gaze, despite the emotional weight of this recognition. The woman you fell in love with was operating with incomplete information about the man she was choosing. The qualities you're invoking, understanding, compassion, were extended within what I believed was relationship built on mutual honesty. The foundation of that relationship has been revealed as fundamentally compromised. People make mistakes, Emily. Relationships require forgiveness and grace. Are you really claiming you've never withheld information or made errors in judgment? The comparison is false equivalence, I replied. Occasional mistakes or normal privacy boundaries differ fundamentally from systematic pattern of information control maintained daily for years. This isn't about perfectionism, it's about basic integrity between presented self and actual behavior. As our conversation approached the 1-hour limit I had established, James made final emotional appeal, referencing our shared dreams, the life we had planned together, the potential for growth through this challenging experience. The sincerity in his expression seemed genuine, highlighting the complexity of compartmentalized personality Melissa had described, capable of authentic connection in certain dimensions, while maintaining fundamental disconnection between presented self and actual behavior. I need you to understand something, James, I said as our time concluded. This isn't impulsive reaction to single discovery. It's recognition of patterns that make authentic partnership impossible. Whatever genuine feelings exist between us, they were built on foundation that included systematic deception. That reality can't be undone through promises or explanations. I placed final document on table between us, printed list of wedding vendors with cancellation policies highlighted, and notification letter I had drafted for guests. I've calculated financial obligations for vendor contracts. I'll cover my portion as originally agreed. The apartment lease remains in both our names until November. I'll be staying with Jen until I find permanent housing. You can remain in the apartment, though I'll need coordinated times to collect my belongings. The business-like approach visibly startled him, perhaps the first genuine, unmanaged reaction of our entire conversation. You've already decided to cancel the wedding, without even giving us a chance to work through this together? The decision isn't about the wedding, James. It's about recognizing fundamental incompatibility in our approaches to relationship. You believe compartmentalization and information control are acceptable within intimate partnership. I believe authentic connection requires integration and transparency. Neither perspective is likely to change through discussion or therapy. As I gathered my documents and prepared to leave, James made one final attempt at connection. I do love you, Emily. Whatever you believe about me, that part has always been real. The statement hung between us, impossible to verify or discount given the broader patterns of compartmentalization. I acknowledged it with simple nod, neither accepting nor rejecting its validity. recognizing that emotional truth could exist alongside behavioral patterns that made partnership untenable. Goodbye, James. I'll have my lawyer contact you regarding remaining logistics. Walking away from that cafe table represented the most difficult and necessary decision of my adult life. Choosing integrity of relationship over intensity of connection, fundamental trust over familiar comfort, uncertain future over compromised present. The grief was real and substantial, encompassing not just the partner I was leaving, but the future I had envisioned alongside him. Yet beneath the pain lay unexpected clarity, recognition that authentic partnership required alignment between presented self and actual behavior, between expressed values and demonstrated choices. Whatever genuine connection had existed with James, it had been built upon foundation that included fundamental deception, a reality that no amount of explanation or future promises could effectively address. The initial weeks following our confrontation passed in blur of practical logistics and overwhelming emotion. I moved temporarily into my friend Jen's spare bedroom, grateful for both physical space and emotional support during a acute phase of adjustment. Canceling wedding arrangements, venues, caterers, florists, accommodations for out-of-town guests provided structure amid chaos, each completed task representing small step toward reclaimed autonomy. The most challenging aspect was communicating the situation to family and friends who had celebrated our engagement and anticipated shared future. I crafted carefully worded email explaining cancellation in terms that maintained privacy while acknowledging reality. Due to recently discovered fundamental differences in our approaches to relationship, James and I have made the difficult decision to end our engagement. We appreciate your support and understanding during this challenging time. Most responses expressed appropriate sympathy without pressing for details. Close friends offered practical help and emotional presence without judgment or excessive curiosity. Family reactions varied more widely, my parents providing unconditional support while occasionally expressing confusion about sudden dissolution of what had appeared to be healthy partnership. "We just want to understand what happened," my mother said during one particularly difficult phone conversation. "You seemed so happy together. Was there something we missed? Something we could have protected you from?" The questions reflected natural parental instinct to safeguard adult children, even when such protection was no longer possible. I provided simplified explanation that balanced honesty with appropriate boundaries. I discovered patterns of dishonesty that compromised my ability to trust the foundation of our relationship. The specific details matter less than the recognition that we had fundamentally different understandings of what partnership requires. Professional impact proved surprisingly manageable. My architecture firm granted 2-week personal leave, colleagues providing space for processing, while maintaining practical support upon my return. Work itself offered welcome distraction, concrete problems with definable solutions, providing contrast to emotional complexity that defied simple resolution. James's response to separation evolved through predictable phases. Initial attempts at reconciliation through multiple messages emphasizing his love and commitment. Strategic deployment of mutual friends to convey his remorse and desire to work through this challenge together. Eventual shift toward financial negotiations when emotional appeals failed to generate desired response. Throughout these approaches, I maintained consistent boundaries, directing personal communication through respective attorneys, limiting direct interaction to practical matters requiring immediate attention. The most unexpected aspect of aftermath was physical response to prolonged stress and emotional disruption. Despite regular exercise and attention to nutrition, my body manifested grief through persistent symptoms, insomnia that transformed nights into exhausting cycles of rumination, appetite fluctuations that left me simultaneously nauseous and ravenous, concentration fractures that made professional focus require exceptional effort even on good days. "You're experiencing normal trauma response," my therapist explained during weekly sessions that provided essential support during this period. The discovery of systematic deception within intimate relationship represents attachment injury that affects both psychological and physiological functioning. These symptoms aren't weakness or overreaction. Their appropriate response to legitimate harm. This framing helped me approach recovery with greater self-compassion, recognizing physical manifestations as natural part of healing process, rather than additional failure requiring correction. Gradual implementation of structured self-care, consistent sleep schedule, intentional nutrition, daily movement, regular social connection, provided foundation for incremental improvement rather than immediate resolution. 1 month after confrontation, James's continued attempts at contact through various channels, mutual friends, email accounts not specifically blocked, handwritten letter delivered to my office, necessitated more formal boundaries. My attorney sent cease and desist letter establishing clear expectations. All communication would occur through legal representatives. Personal contact attempts would be documented for potential restraining order if necessary. Shared property would be divided through mediated process rather than direct negotiation. The formality felt extreme given our previous intimacy, yet represented necessary response to demonstrated patterns of information management and boundary testing. The explicit legal framework provided clarity that appeared effective. Direct contact attempts ceased immediately. Emotional appeals redirected toward practical logistics of separating intertwined lives. 6 weeks after confrontation, I secured separate apartment and began process of rebuilding independent life. The new space, selected solely for my preferences rather than negotiated compromise, provided tangible representation of reclaimed autonomy. Furnishing this environment became therapeutic exercise in self-discovery, each decision reflecting values and aesthetics temporarily submerged within relationship accommodation. Melissa reached out during this period, her email striking careful balance between supportive connection and appropriate boundaries. I've thought about you often since our conversation and hope you're taking good care of yourself during this difficult transition. While I have no desire to remain connected to James's life in any capacity, I'm available if you need additional perspective or simply understanding from someone who has navigated similar terrain. The offer represented rare opportunity for insight from someone who uniquely understood specific patterns involved in my situation. After careful consideration, I accepted invitation for brief video call, grateful for both practical wisdom and validation of my experience. The hardest part isn't the practical separation, I acknowledged during our conversation. It's reconciling the person I believed I knew with the patterns now visible. Sometimes I still question my decision, wondering if I overreacted to single deception rather than recognizing broader patterns. That cognitive dissonance is entirely normal, Melissa assured me. The James we each experienced wasn't entirely fictional. His interests, conversational style, capacity for apparent connection are genuine aspects of his personality. What's missing is integration between compartmentalized selves and consistent alignment between expressed values and actual behavior. Her perspective provided valuable framework for processing complex emotions without either dismissing genuine connection or minimizing legitimate concerns. Most importantly, she offered living example of successful recovery from similar experience. 3 years post-divorce, she had established thriving professional practice, developed healthy relationship with partner who demonstrated consistent integration between values and actions, and maintained appropriate boundaries with James despite his occasional attempts at re-establishing connection. Recovery isn't linear, she acknowledged toward conclusion of our conversation. You'll have days of clarity followed by periods of doubt, moments of empowerment interrupted by waves of grief. The consistency comes not from absence of difficult emotions, but from increasing trust in your own discernment despite those natural fluctuations. 2 months after confrontation, James made final attempt at direct communication. Email sent from unfamiliar account to circumvent established filters. The message displayed familiar pattern of partial acknowledgement, combined with continued minimization. I understand now that hiding my marriage was a serious mistake that damaged your trust. I'm getting therapy to address my communication issues, but the love between us was always real. Is there any possibility you might consider conversation about potential reconciliation? The framing revealed unchanged perspective, characterizing systematic pattern as isolated communication issue rather than fundamental approach to relationship. The continued emphasis on emotional connection without addressing behavioral patterns confirmed wisdom of maintained separation, despite genuine grief for lost potential. I forwarded message to my attorney without direct response, maintaining boundaries that had proven necessary for continued healing. The lack of engagement apparently communicated finality more effectively than explicit rejection. No further contact attempts occurred, suggesting James had finally accepted reality of permanent separation. 3 months after confrontation, life had established new patterns that supported functionality, while acknowledging continuing impact of significant betrayal. Professional responsibilities provided meaningful engagement beyond personal disruption, with recent project success affirming capabilities that transcended relationship status. Friendship connections had evolved naturally, some strengthening through authentic support during crisis, others revealing limitations through discomfort with emotional complexity, new connections emerging through expanded social engagement. The most notable evolution involved my relationship with trust, both of others and myself. The initial hypervigilance that interpreted all relationship dynamics through lens of potential deception had gradually yielded to more nuanced discernment, allowing appropriate vulnerability within clearly established boundaries while maintaining awareness of legitimate risk factors. Trust isn't about finding someone who will never hurt you, my therapist observed during this period. It's about developing confidence that you can recognize warning signs, establish appropriate boundaries, and navigate relational challenges without losing yourself in the process. This framework supported cautious re-engagement with dating landscape, not actively pursuing new relationship, but remaining open to natural connections that might develop through existing social networks and shared interests. When colleague introduced me to his brother during casual dinner gathering, I found myself capable of normal social interaction without hypervigilance or automatic comparison to experience with James. 4 months after confrontation, I received unexpected email from Elaine, the photographer whose innocent question had catalyzed entire revelation. She expressed continued regret about inadvertent disclosure while acknowledging potential service performed, despite unintended consequences. While I would never have deliberately created such painful situation, I believe you deserve to know the truth before making lifetime commitment. I hope you're finding healing and wish you every happiness moving forward. The message prompted reflection on strange gratitude that had gradually emerged alongside natural grief, appreciation for discovery that had occurred before legal and potentially parental entanglement would have made separation exponentially more complicated. The pain of broken engagement, while substantial, represented significantly less disruption than divorce proceedings or co-parenting negotiations would have entailed had deception continued undiscovered. 5 months after confrontation, James's personal items, still uncollected from my storage unit, prompted final communication through our respective attorneys, deadline for retrieval before donation to appropriate charitable organizations. The exchange occurred without direct interaction, professional representatives handling logistics that allowed formal closure without reopening emotional wounds still in process of healing. The completed transaction represented meaningful milestone, physical separation now aligned with emotional and legal boundaries already established. The wedding that would have occurred that month existed now only as canceled arrangements and returned gifts. Alternate future replaced by present reality built on painful but necessary recognition of fundamental incompatibility. 6 months after confrontation, life had established rhythms that supported functionality while acknowledging continuing impact of significant relationship dissolution. The apartment felt increasingly like home rather than temporary accommodation. Professional responsibilities provided meaningful challenge and satisfaction. Social connections reflected authentic choice rather than couples-oriented obligation or crisis response. Most significantly, my relationship with trust had evolved toward nuanced discernment rather than binary extremes, recognizing spectrum between naive vulnerability and paranoid withdrawal, developing capacity to extend appropriate openness while maintaining healthy boundaries. The betrayal had changed me irrevocably, yet those changes increasingly included growth alongside injury, discernment alongside caution, possibility alongside legitimate concern. The goal isn't returning to previous state. my therapist emphasized during session marking 6-month milestone. It's integrating experience into evolving understanding of yourself and relationships. By that standard, you've demonstrated remarkable resilience navigating circumstances no one would willingly choose. The validation provided framework for continued growth without expectation of complete resolution, acknowledging both healing achieved and ongoing integration that would likely continue throughout life, rather than concluding with artificial endpoint. 7 months after confrontation, I experienced what my therapist identified as significant recovery milestone, the first day without intrusive thoughts about James or our relationship. The absence wasn't permanent. Such thoughts returned periodically in subsequent days, but demonstrated capacity for authentic presence unfiltered through betrayal lens. That's meaningful progress, my therapist affirmed when I reported this experience. Not because you've moved on or gotten over it, but because your brain is demonstrating ability to engage fully with present experience without constant reference to past injury. This validation helped me recognize other subtle healing markers, sleeping through the night without disruption, enjoying meals for their taste rather than consuming for basic sustenance, experiencing genuine laughter without subsequent guilt about positive emotions amid ongoing recovery. The most significant shift involved perspective on the experience itself, moving from "why did this happen to me" toward "what can I learn from this experience?" This reframing wasn't toxic positivity or silver lining thinking, but recognition that integration required extracting meaningful insight from painful circumstances without minimizing legitimate harm or suggesting suffering itself held inherent purpose. 8 months after confrontation, I accepted invitation to conference in Chicago, professional opportunity I might previously have declined due to association with James's former location. The decision represented intentional reclamation of experience, not fundamentally defined by relationship connections, though I acknowledged natural anxiety about potential triggers in unfamiliar environment. The trip proved unexpectedly therapeutic, navigating new city with professional confidence while creating positive associations unrelated to previous narratives. During free afternoon, I visited architectural landmarks I had long admired, reclaiming personal interests temporarily submerged within relationship priorities. On final evening, colleague gathering included unexpected connection with senior architect from prominent firm, whose work I had respected throughout my career. Our professional conversation evolved toward more personal exchange, revealing compatible perspectives on various topics. When Thomas suggested dinner the following evening, I found myself accepting without automated comparison to previous relationship or hypervigilance about potential deception. The evening unfolded with remarkable ease, conversation flowing naturally between professional interests and personal backgrounds, shared humor emerging without performative quality that characterized similar exchanges during early dating. When conversation eventually touched on previous relationships, I provided measured disclosure about recent engagement dissolution, without detailed explanation of circumstances. Thomas responded with balanced perspective that neither minimized significant experience nor treated it as defining characteristic. That sounds incredibly challenging. Major transitions always involve both loss and potential, though recognizing the latter usually takes longer than acknowledging the former. The simple acknowledgement without excessive curiosity or immediate self-disclosure represented refreshing approach to appropriate vulnerability, recognizing significance without demanding intimate details before relationship depth warranted such exchange. 9 months after confrontation, this connection had evolved through occasional video conversations and professional collaboration opportunities. The gradual development, absent artificial timelines or predetermined relationship trajectory, provided space for authentic assessment rather than emotionally reactive engagement. When Thomas mentioned upcoming trip to my city for industry conference, his suggestion of dinner during his visit felt like natural extension of established connection rather than weighted relationship milestone. The evening confirmed in-person chemistry initially experienced in Chicago, conversations moving easily between professional projects, personal interests, and philosophical perspectives without performance or agenda. "I've enjoyed getting to know you these past few months," he acknowledged as evening concluded. I'd like to continue exploring this connection if you're open to that possibility. No pressure or expectations, just genuine interest in where this might lead. The straightforward communication without manipulative subtext represented stark contrast to patterns experienced with James. My response reflected similar directness. I've enjoyed our connection as well. I'm open to continued exploration with understanding that I'm still processing significant relationship transition and moving at measured pace as a result. His acceptance of these parameters without either defensive withdrawal or boundary testing persistence provided additional evidence of potential compatibility, respecting legitimate caution without interpreting it as personal rejection or invitation to persuasion. 10 months after confrontation, I received unexpected communication from James, formal email sent through appropriate channels rather than boundary-violating direct contact. The message exhibited notable shift from previous approaches. I've been working with therapists specializing in relationship patterns and behavioral integration. Through this process, I've gained clearer understanding of how my compartmentalization and information management created fundamental breach of trust in our relationship. While I understand your decision is final and contact unwelcome, I wanted to acknowledge the legitimate harm my choices caused without expectation of response or reconciliation. The communication represented potential evidence of meaningful reflection rather than strategic performance designed to achieve specific outcome. The acknowledgement of specific patterns rather than vague mistakes suggested possible growth beyond previous perspective that characterized systematic deception as isolated error in judgment. After consultation with my therapist, I chose not to respond directly, maintaining boundaries that had proven essential for healing, while privately acknowledging potential significance of evolved perspective. Whatever growth James might be experiencing belonged to his individual journey rather than our terminated relationship, yet the communication provided subtle closure that previous attempts had failed to achieve. 11 months after confrontation, personal and professional life had established rhythms reflecting authentic choices rather than crisis response or relationship accommodation. The apartment had transformed from temporary refuge to genuine home through intentional curation. Professional responsibilities had expanded to include leadership role previously declined due to wedding planning obligations. Social connections reflected balanced approach to relationship, neither withdrawal from potential vulnerability nor premature intimacy before appropriate foundation established. Most significantly, my connection with Thomas had evolved through consistent communication and periodic in-person interactions when professional travel allowed. The relationship development followed natural progression without artificial acceleration or strategic information management, each revealing appropriate vulnerability as trust established through demonstrated consistency between expressed values and observable behavior. What distinguishes this connection from your experience with James? My therapist inquired during session exploring relationship development. Integration, I replied after thoughtful consideration. Thomas demonstrates consistent alignment between stated perspectives and actual choices. Information flows naturally without strategic management or compartmentalization. Most importantly, vulnerability emerges through mutual disclosure rather than performance designed to elicit specific response. This recognition didn't represent naive certainty about relationship outcome, but growing confidence in my capacity to discern authentic connection from strategic engagement. The betrayal experience had permanently altered my approach to trust, replacing automatic vulnerability with thoughtful discernment, blind faith with measured confidence based on demonstrated consistency. 12 months after confrontation, full year since discovery of James's hidden marriage had altered anticipated trajectory, I engaged in intentional reflection process recommended by my therapist. The anniversary timing provided opportunity for both acknowledging distance traveled and identifying continuing integration needs. The practical aspects of recovery had largely stabilized, legal and financial entanglements resolved through appropriate professional channels, living situation established independent of crisis response, professional responsibilities maintained despite personal challenges, social connections expanded beyond support during acute trauma. The emotional aspects continued evolving, less linear than practical considerations, with continuing integration rather than definitive resolution. Thoughts of James and our relationship still emerged periodically, though with decreasing frequency and intensity. The betrayal experience remained a significant chapter within my life narrative, yet increasingly existed alongside, rather than dominating other aspects of identity and experience. Most importantly, the relationship with trust, both of others and myself, had developed toward nuanced discernment rather than binary extremes. The capacity to extend appropriate vulnerability within clearly established boundaries, to recognize warning signs without assuming universal deception, to acknowledge both potential risk and potential connection represented sophisticated integration rather than unresolved trauma response. The person you were before discovering James's deception no longer exists, my therapist observed during anniversary session. But the person who emerged through this challenging experience demonstrates remarkable capacity for resilience, discernment, and authentic connection despite legitimate injury. This framing captured a central aspect of recovery journey, not returning to previous state or perspective, but evolving toward new understanding that incorporated painful experience without being fundamentally defined by it. The betrayal had changed me irrevocably, yet those changes increasingly included growth alongside injury, discernment alongside caution, possibility alongside legitimate concern. 13 months after confrontation, relationship with Thomas had developed sufficient foundation for more significant commitment conversations. His job offer in my city created practical opportunity for regular connection without artificial acceleration of relationship timeline. The decision to date exclusively emerged through mutual discussion rather than assumed progression or strategic manipulation. I appreciate your thoughtfulness about relationship development, Thomas acknowledged during conversation, establishing mutual expectations. The measured pace hasn't reflected hesitation so much as intentional foundation building. That approach aligns with my own values regarding meaningful partnership. The explicit communication without hidden agenda represented consistent pattern throughout our connection. Direct expression of needs and boundaries, appropriate vulnerability within established trust, integration between expressed values and observable behavior. These qualities didn't guarantee relationship success, but provided foundation for authentic partnership characterized by mutual respect rather than strategic management. 14 months after confrontation, Melissa's engagement announcement appeared on professional networking platform we both utilized. The notification prompted reflection on parallel recovery journeys from similar betrayal experiences, both navigating challenging aftermath while developing capacity for authentic connection, despite legitimate caution based on previous experience. After brief consideration, I sent congratulatory message acknowledging significance beyond conventional pleasantries. Your engagement announcement brings genuine joy. Beyond celebrating your happiness, it represents meaningful reminder that betrayal experience, while significantly impactful, doesn't define capacity for authentic connection moving forward. Thank you for the perspective and support you provided during my own recovery journey. Her response reflected similar recognition of shared experience without inappropriate over-familiarity. Your message means more than you know. The journey from betrayal to renewed trust involves many moments of doubt and questioning. Seeing others navigate similar terrain with integrity and courage provides powerful affirmation that healing, while rarely linear, remains genuinely possible. This exchange, while brief, represented meaningful milestone in ongoing integration process, acknowledging significant impact of betrayal experience while recognizing it as chapter within continuing narrative rather than defining conclusion. The capacity to celebrate another's relationship milestone without triggering comparison or re-traumatization demonstrated sophisticated healing rather than superficial recovery. 15 months after confrontation, I received wedding invitation from college friend whose engagement party James and I had attended as couple shortly before our relationship dissolution. The invitation addressed solely to me represented both practical acknowledgement of changed circumstances and social recognition of independent identity beyond previous partnership. After thoughtful consideration, I accepted invitation with Thomas as my guest. the decision representing neither reactive statement about relationship status nor avoidance of potentially triggering social context. The wedding itself provided unexpected healing opportunity, participating in celebration of authentic commitment while recognizing contrast with previously planned ceremony based on incomplete foundation. What feels different about attending wedding now versus your perspective before discovering James's deception? My therapist inquired during session exploring this experience. I'm more attuned to relationship quality than ceremonial elements, I reflected. Before, I focused primarily on visible markers of commitment, the ceremony, the celebration, the public acknowledgement. Now I recognize those external elements mean nothing without internal alignment between partners regarding fundamental relationship values. This evolution represented meaningful integration of betrayal experience without allowing it to create cynicism regarding genuine connection. The capacity to distinguish between authentic commitment and performance of relationship milestones, between meaningful transparency and strategic disclosure, between integrated partnership and compartmentalized engagement, demonstrated sophisticated discernment rather than traumatized withdrawal. 16 months after confrontation, James's wedding announcement appeared in social media connections we still shared, despite discontinued direct contact. The notification, featuring James alongside woman I didn't recognize, might previously have triggered significant emotional disruption. Instead, it generated complex but manageable response, combining mild curiosity about timeline with genuine hope that both James and his new partner had established authentic foundation rather than repeating previous patterns. After brief acknowledgement of these feelings during therapy session, I redirected focus toward present circumstances rather than past relationship, recognizing James's continuing life journey as parallel narrative rather than chapter requiring my continued attention or emotional investment. This capacity to acknowledge information without becoming reabsorbed in previous trauma represented significant recovery milestone, not because emotional response was absent, but because it remained proportional and contextual rather than overwhelming or defining. The information registered as relevant but not central, connected to my experience but not determinative of my emotional state. 17 months after confrontation, relationship with Thomas had developed sufficient foundation for cohabitation discussion. Unlike previous living arrangement decisions characterized by assumed progression or practical convenience, this conversation involved explicit communication about expectations, boundaries, and potential challenges. What concerns you most about sharing living space after your experience with James? Thomas asked, during one of several discussions exploring this potential step. I worry about losing objective perspective on relationship patterns, I acknowledged after thoughtful consideration. Cohabitation creates gradual accumulation of shared life that can sometimes obscure incremental changes in relationship dynamics. With James, our integrated daily routine made it difficult to maintain critical assessment of certain patterns until external catalyst forced recognition. This transparent communication about legitimate concerns based on previous experience demonstrated both personal growth and relationship health, capacity to identify specific vulnerabilities without generalizing past betrayal to current partnership. Thomas's response reflected similar integration between emotional support and practical problem solving. That's understandable concern given your experience. Perhaps we could establish regular relationship check-ins separate from daily logistics, dedicated time for meta-communication about our patterns and dynamics, rather than just managing shared life. Would that address some of your hesitation? The suggested approach, acknowledging legitimate concern while developing specific strategies rather than either dismissing caution or accepting limitation as permanent, represented balanced response, supporting authentic connection without minimizing significant past experience. 18 months after confrontation, I attended professional conference where James was listed among presenters, our first potential in-person encounter since relationship dissolution. After careful consideration of emotional readiness and practical logistics, I chose to maintain my attendance plans rather than altering professional engagement based on his presence. The actual interaction proved anticlimactic. Brief, civil acknowledgement in group setting without private conversation or emotional disruption. The capacity to occupy same professional space without significant re-traumatization represented meaningful recovery milestone, not because emotional response was absent, but because it remained manageable within broader context of established life beyond previous relationship. Most significantly, the anticipated anxiety had proven disproportionate to actual experience, demonstrating growing alignment between emotional response and present reality rather than traumatic anticipation based on past circumstances. This calibration represented sophisticated nervous system regulation rather than suppression or denial of legitimate concerns. 19 months after confrontation, Thomas and I implemented planned cohabitation with thoughtfully established parameters supporting both relational connection and individual autonomy. The shared space reflected mutual input rather than dominant aesthetic. Financial arrangements acknowledged respective resources without creating dependency or power imbalance. Household responsibilities distributed based on preferences and capabilities rather than gendered expectations or convenience. Most importantly, the relationship maintained explicit communication about expectations and boundaries, regular check-ins addressing emerging patterns before they became problematic, direct expression of needs without manipulative subtext, appropriate vulnerability within established trust. These qualities didn't guarantee perpetual harmony, but provided foundation for addressing inevitable challenges through collaborative problem-solving rather than defensive withdrawal or strategic management. 24 months after confrontation, marking full 2 years since discovery of James's hidden marriage had altered anticipated trajectory, I engaged in final structured reflection with my therapist before transitioning to less frequent maintenance sessions. The anniversary provided opportunity for comprehensive assessment of recovery journey and continuing integration process. How would you describe your current relationship with this experience? My therapist inquired as we reviewed significant milestones across 2-year timeline. It's been fully incorporated into my understanding of relationships and trust, I responded after thoughtful consideration. The betrayal represents significant chapter within my life narrative, without defining my approach to connection or overwhelming other aspects of identity. I can acknowledge impact without remaining centered in trauma response. This integration extended beyond personal healing to professional insight, social discernment, and relational capacity. Architecture career had evolved to include project focused on transitional housing for those navigating major life disruptions, professional application of personal experience without inappropriate disclosure or boundary violation. Friendship connections reflected balanced vulnerability within established trust rather than either preemptive withdrawal or indiscriminate disclosure. Relationship with Thomas demonstrated capacity for authentic partnership, characterized by integrated communication rather than compartmentalized engagement. Most significantly, relationship with trust had evolved toward sophisticated discernment rather than binary extremes. Recognizing spectrum between naive vulnerability and paranoid withdrawal, developing capacity to extend appropriate openness while maintaining healthy boundaries, acknowledging both potential risk and potential connection within intimate relationships. The person you were before discovering James's deception doesn't exist anymore, my therapist observed, echoing assessment from 1 year earlier. But the person who emerged through this challenging experience demonstrates remarkable capacity for resilience, discernment, and authentic connection despite legitimate injury. The observation captured essential truth about recovery from betrayal trauma, not returning to previous state or perspective, but evolving toward new understanding that incorporated painful experience without being fundamentally defined by it. The process wasn't about forgetting or minimizing significant harm, but integrating that experience into continuing narrative characterized by authentic connection rather than strategic performance. 26 months after confrontation, approaching completion of my 2nd year in relationship with Thomas, unexpected email arrived from Melissa. Invitation to her upcoming wedding, with brief note acknowledging unusual connection while expressing genuine appreciation for parallel recovery journeys. After thoughtful consideration and conversation with Thomas, I accepted invitation with clear parameters, attending ceremony and brief reception without extended celebration, providing supportive presence without assuming inappropriate familiarity. The decision reflected nuanced understanding of unusual relationship rather than either complete avoidance or boundary violation. The wedding itself provided powerful contrast to both my canceled ceremony with James and his subsequent marriage reported through social media. Melissa and her partner demonstrated visible integration between expressed commitment and established foundation, relationship built through transparent communication, and demonstrated consistency rather than compartmentalized performance or strategic disclosure. During brief reception interaction, Melissa expressed appreciation for my attendance while acknowledging unusual circumstances of our connection. There's something powerfully affirming about celebrating authentic partnership with someone who understands the journey from betrayal to renewed trust, she noted, not despite our parallel experiences, but because of them. The observation captured essential aspect of integrated recovery, capacity to acknowledge significance of betrayal experience while recognizing it as chapter within continuing narrative rather than defining conclusion. The wedding celebration represented not denial of previous pain, but affirmation of continuing possibility, despite legitimate injury and necessary caution. 28 months after confrontation, Thomas raised possibility of formal commitment discussion, not pressuring specific timeline or predetermined outcome, but acknowledging depth of connection and desire for intentional conversation about potential shared future. Unlike previous engagement characterized by romantic narrative and external expectations, this discussion involved explicit communication about relationship values, practical considerations, and recognition of both commitment benefits and inherent vulnerabilities. Most importantly, it emerged through mutual exploration rather than strategic progression toward predetermined milestone. What concerns would you have about formal commitment given your previous experience? Thomas inquired during one of several conversations addressing this potential step. I've recognized that engagement itself offers limited protection against relationship dissolution, I acknowledged. The legal and ceremonial elements matter less than fundamental alignment about partnership values and consistent integration between expressed commitments and demonstrated behavior. This perspective, prioritizing relationship quality over ceremonial markers while maintaining openness to meaningful commitment, represented sophisticated integration of betrayal experience without allowing it to preclude authentic connection. The capacity to distinguish between performance of relationship milestones and genuine partnership foundation demonstrated evolved discernment rather than traumatized avoidance. 30 months after confrontation, engagement with Thomas emerged through mutual decision following extended consideration rather than dramatic proposal or social expectation. The commitment represented thoughtful choice based on demonstrated consistency rather than romantic narrative or external timeline, relationship foundation established through transparent communication and integrated behavior over significant duration. Unlike previous engagement characterized by traditional expectations and generic celebration, this commitment involved personalized expression, reflecting actual relationship dynamics rather than performed roles. The selected ring featured architectural elements honoring my professional identity rather than conventional design. Announcement emphasized partnership values rather than romantic narrative. Celebration gathered those who had genuinely supported relationship development rather than obligatory social connections. Most significantly, the commitment included explicit acknowledgement of both relationship strength and inherent vulnerability, recognizing that meaningful partnership involves risk that cannot be eliminated through careful assessment or extended timeline. The willingness to embrace measured uncertainty based on demonstrated consistency rather than absolute guarantees represented sophisticated trust capacity rather than naive vulnerability. The difference isn't absence of uncertainty, I explained to friend who asked about decision given previous experience. It's foundation for managing that uncertainty through transparent communication and consistent integration between expressed values and actual behavior. Authentic partnership never eliminates vulnerability, but establishes patterns that support navigating inevitable challenges through collaborative engagement rather than strategic management. 32 months after confrontation, wedding planning with Thomas proceeded with fundamentally different approach than previous experience. Decisions emphasized personal meaning rather than external expectations. Practical logistics supported celebration without creating unnecessary stress. Financial commitments remained proportional to actual resources rather than aspirational presentation. Most importantly, the planning process itself reflected relationship values rather than predetermined narrative. Collaborative decision-making without power struggles, direct communication about preferences without manipulative tactics, appropriate compromise without fundamental boundary violations. These qualities didn't eliminate occasional disagreements, but provided foundation for addressing differences through mutual respect rather than strategic maneuvering. When unexpected wedding invitation arrived from James and his wife, apparently obtained through mutual acquaintance shared through professional network, the gesture created momentary disruption requiring thoughtful response. After careful consideration with both Thomas and therapist, I declined with brief message acknowledging gesture while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Thank you for the inclusion. While I wish you both happiness in your marriage, I believe maintaining respective distance remains healthiest approach given our history. I appreciate your understanding. The capacity to establish clear boundary without excessive explanation or emotional reactivity represented sophisticated integration, acknowledging both personal healing progress and wisdom of continued separation. The boundary reflected neither ongoing trauma response nor complete indifference, but appropriate discernment regarding relationship parameters following significant betrayal experience. 36 months after confrontation, marking full 3 years since discovery of James's hidden marriage had altered anticipated trajectory, wedding with Thomas represented meaningful milestone within continuing recovery journey. The celebration itself embodied integrated approach to commitment, ceremony acknowledging both relationship strengths and inherent vulnerabilities, vows expressing authentic promises rather than idealized projections, celebration gathering genuine support network rather than perform social obligations. Most significantly, the commitment emerged through relationship characterized by consistent alignment between expressed values and demonstrated behavior, not perfect partnership without challenges, but authentic connection maintained through transparent communication rather than strategic management. This foundation provided neither guarantee against future difficulty nor protection from inherent relationship vulnerability, but established patterns supporting collaborative navigation of inevitable challenges. During quiet moment apart from celebration, Thomas acknowledged significance beyond conventional wedding narrative. Today represents meaningful milestone, but not completion or definitive resolution. Our commitment involves continuing choice rather than singular moment, daily decision to maintain transparent communication and integrated behavior despite inevitable challenges that partnership involves. The observation captured essential understanding about authentic commitment following betrayal experience, recognizing both possibility of genuine connection and ongoing requirement for consistent integration between expressed values and demonstrated choices. The wedding celebration represented not denial of potential vulnerability, but affirmation of partnership foundation established through demonstrated consistency over significant duration. 3 days after wedding, unexpected email arrived from Melissa with subject line "Full Circle" and brief message of congratulations. Saw your wedding announcement through mutual connection. There's something profoundly affirming about witnessing someone navigate similar betrayal journey toward authentic partnership. Your experience provided meaningful perspective during my own recovery process. Perhaps knowledge of your current milestone might offer similar affirmation for someone else at earlier stage of healing journey. The message captured essential truth about integrated recovery from relational betrayal, capacity to acknowledge significant impact without remaining defined by traumatic experience, to recognize continuing vulnerability without foreclosing authentic connection, to extend appropriate trust based on demonstrated consistency rather than naive assumption or paranoid withdrawal. Most importantly, it reflected possibility of transforming painful experience into meaningful wisdom that extends beyond individual healing toward broader contribution, not through toxic positivity or silver lining thinking, but through authentic integration that acknowledges both legitimate harm and potential growth without requiring reconciliation of these seemingly contradictory realities. The wedding photographer who had inadvertently revealed James's previous marriage through casual question 3 years earlier was not part of this celebration. Practical decision based on geographical location rather than symbolic statement about previous experience. Yet her unwitting catalyst role remained acknowledged within broader narrative. Revelation that had initiated painful but ultimately necessary recalibration of relationship understanding and trust capacity. What began with devastating discovery had evolved through intentional processing into sophisticated discernment, capacity to distinguish between authentic connection and strategic performance, between integrated partnership and compartmentalized engagement, between appropriate vulnerability and naive exposure. The betrayal experience had irrevocably altered my approach to relationship, yet those changes increasingly reflected growth alongside injury, discernment alongside caution, possibility alongside legitimate concern. The woman who had sat stunned in wedding photographer's studio 3 years earlier no longer existed in original form, transformed through challenging but necessary integration process into someone capable of more nuanced understanding about relationship dynamics and trust development. The capacity to establish authentic partnership following significant betrayal represented not denial of previous pain, but affirmation of continuing possibility, despite legitimate injury. Perhaps most meaningful was evolved perspective on uncertainty itself, recognizing that definitive resolution rarely characterizes human experience, particularly regarding intimate relationship. The capacity to embrace measured vulnerability, despite legitimate caution, to extend appropriate trust based on demonstrated consistency rather than absolute guarantee, to maintain authentic connection without requiring elimination of inherent risk, represented sophisticated integration rather than incomplete healing. 3 years after casual question from wedding photographer had revealed hidden marriage and catalyzed profound life recalibration, the integration process continued through everyday choices rather than dramatic milestones. The betrayal experience remained significant chapter within continuing narrative without defining entirety of relationship approach or personal identity. Acknowledged rather than erased, incorporated rather than controlling, informing discernment without precluding connection. The truth had found its way to the surface through unexpected channel, revealing deception that might otherwise have remained hidden indefinitely. While I would never have chosen such painful revelation, the integration that followed, however incomplete or ongoing, had created foundation for authenticity that previous relationship had systematically undermined through compartmentalization and strategic management. Sometimes the most unwelcome discoveries create necessary disruption of patterns that cannot be addressed until they become visible. Sometimes the most painful revelations catalyze growth that wouldn't emerge without fundamental recalibration. And sometimes the photographer asking innocent question about previous wedding package reveals truth that changes everything, in ways both devastating and ultimately transformative. TLDR. 6 weeks before my wedding, our photographer accidentally revealed my fiancé had been previously married when she asked if we wanted the same package as last time. He had never mentioned being married before, and my investigation revealed a pattern of deception across multiple relationships. I ended our engagement, spent 2 years rebuilding my understanding of trust and relationships, and eventually found a healthier partnership built on genuine transparency rather than selective disclosure. Edit 1. Many people have asked if James and his first wife, Melissa, ever reconnected after I ended our engagement. They didn't. Melissa is now happily married to someone else, and according to mutual connections, James married another woman about a year after our relationship ended. I genuinely hope he's addressed his patterns of compartmentalization for everyone's sake. Edit 2. For those asking, yes, I did consider couples therapy before ending the engagement. The issue wasn't just the hidden marriage itself, but the pattern it revealed. When someone demonstrates they can maintain complete deception daily for years, the foundation of trust necessary for effective therapy doesn't exist. Some breaches can't be repaired through communication alone. Update. 1 year later. Life continues to evolve in ways I couldn't have predicted. Thomas and I have been married for 8 months now, building a relationship based on transparency and integration rather than compartmentalization. I've become unexpectedly involved in occasional speaking engagements about rebuilding trust after betrayal, something that started when I shared my story at a women's professional development retreat. The most surprising development, Elaine, the photographer who revealed James's secret, photographed my wedding to Thomas, creating a full-circle moment that felt strangely healing. Sometimes the person who delivers painful truth becomes part of your transformation story in ways you never expected. Thank you all for your support during what was truly the darkest period of my life. Your comments helped me remember I wasn't alone in experiencing this kind of betrayal and recovery.